Apocalypse Now is one of the 10 best movies ever made, and in my opinion, the greatest war movie ever made. Hour-long video essays could be made about the movie's sound design, the unbelievable cinematography, the seemingly impossible set pieces, but Hollywood pumps out many movies that look and sound amazing. What sets Apocalypse Now and other all-time great stories apart are their characters and their message. Any film reviewer who considers those two things to be secondary, I take little interest in. In this video, I'm going to focus on just two of the movie's extensive list of incredible characters and how they work together to create the movie's core theme. The first character that needs to be analyzed and understood is Lieutenant Colonel Bill Kilgore. For starters, Colonel Kilgore is one of the best supporting characters of all time. In the theatrical cut of the movie, Robert Duvall only gets 11 minutes of screen time, but 11 minutes is all he needs to leave a permanent mark on film history. I don't think there's a single greatest movie quotes list that doesn't have Kilgore's name on it. So what makes this character so special? The first thing that is impossible to ignore is his name, Kilgore. Originally, his name was supposed to be Colonel Carnage, but Coppola and the writers decided to be slightly less subtle about what he represents. It doesn't take long for Willard to recognize what Kilgore's squadron, the 9th Cav or Air Mobile, is all about. When he meets them, they've just got done capturing a Vietnamese town, and it is a complete mess. Civilian dead bodies are everywhere, women and children are just being rounded up and shipped off to God knows where. But unlike most war films, there's almost a cartoonish feel about the chaos we're watching. When Kilgore touches down on the battlefield, he doesn't try to bring any order to the chaos. The first thing he does is lay down death cards, then he considers giving a dying Viet Cong soldier some water, which seems pretty honorable, but of course he gets distracted by the arrival of Lance Johnson, a famous surfboarder. Although Kilgore's obsession with surfboarding may seem put in solely for comedic purposes, it's actually integral to understanding not just Kilgore, but also Colonel Kurtz. From the very beginning, we see how hard Kilgore's squadron tries to block out the war experience with American culture. When Willard first meets Kilgore, amidst the fire and the screams, there are soldiers throwing a football and a pastor just giving a sermon. It could just be another Sunday in the suburbs for these soldiers, and that is the atmosphere that Kilgore is trying to create. After the first battle, Kilgore and his men chill out on the beach and have a cookout, and when Willard sees this, he makes one of the key observations of the entire movie.
The more they tried to make it just like home, the more they made everybody miss it.
Kilgore believes that making this hell more like home will soften the blow of what his men see, but it actually ends up doing the opposite. And Kilgore could be forgiven for taking this strategy. He doesn't seem to be as affected by the things he's seen and done in war, but he's clearly a unique individual. Willard even points out that he has this weird light around him that makes him seem invulnerable, and when mortars are blowing up around everybody after the Ride of the Valkyries, he doesn't even flinch, even though everyone else does. So, in other words, he's not the best test subject for his own coping strategy. The Ride of the Valkyries itself is a testament to how Kilgore thinks soldiers should approach war. When Willard wants Kilgore to escort him to a Charlie-controlled village for his mission, Kilgore is hesitant. But when he learns that the beach has good peaks for surfing, well, every weapon at his disposal must be readied. The Ride of the Valkyries begins with one of the most badass shots of all time. Do not get in between Kilgore and a quality surfing experience. There will be hell to pay. And the music they play before peppering the enemy village with missiles is just another example of Kilgore trying to lighten the mood, if you will. And Lance, who is new to war, he reacts like a kid on Christmas morning. But those who've actually spent extended time in Vietnam, like Willard, they don't think much of it. The attack on the village is eventually successful, but once again, it's also incredibly messy. And one reason for that is Kilgore is more interested in getting Lance out on a surfboard than making sure all strategic points are neutralized. Kilgore and his men are not fighting to win the war with minimum civilian casualties. They are fighting for R&R. They're fighting for an artificial escape from the horrors they've been forced into. And as I will talk about later, this is exactly what Kurtz despised about the American war effort. When Kilgore gets annoyed that mortars are making surfing a little bit tricky, he calls it a napalm strike, which of course leads to one of the most iconic lines in film history.
You smell that? Napalm, son! Nothing else in the world smells like that. I love the smell of napalm in the morning.
What I love about this line is that it almost feels like an admission. It's almost like he's kind of embarrassed about it. And the line is integral to understanding Kilgore. A napalm strike represents victory. Victory offers a break from battle, a break from the chaos of war. And the line that follows shortly after concludes Kilgore's character perfectly.
Someday this war's gonna end.
Someday this war is going to end. On Kilgore's wiki page, it says that he enjoys war. I don't think this is the case. I think he's able to handle it a lot better than a vast majority of soldiers, but he clearly still longs for home. He wouldn't spend so much time trying to recreate it if he didn't. And Kilgore may leave the film after the scene, but what he represents remains until Willard reaches Kurtz. Kilgore represents the attempt to make the horrors of war, as Kurtz would call them, your enemy. He tries to fight the terror of war by importing what is familiar and comfortable. This may be a serviceable strategy for him, but it doesn't work for most others. As Willard continues down the river, he sees soldiers water skiing and attending Playboy events. It's like the Army is trying to turn Vietnam into spring break, but it just does not work. The Playboy event is a complete disaster because, just like Willard says, it only makes the soldiers miss home more. And when Willard sees all of this, he makes an important observation. Charlie only has two ways home: death or victory. That is what Kurtz wanted the American soldiers to believe as well. On his way to Kurtz, Willard passes by Do Long Bridge, where he meets a very important character who I'll talk about in a little bit. And the boat also passes by the tail of a fallen B-52, which doesn't have all that much relation to what I'm talking about in this video, but it is my favorite shot in cinema history, so I thought I'd point it out. Seeing such a destructive weapon of war crashed in the middle of a jungle, it almost feels mythical. Now, Kilgore's antithesis is, of course, Colonel Walter Kurtz, and their extreme contrasts are not just philosophical. Kurtz and Kilgore also have opposite temperaments. Kilgore is bombastic, pun intended, and he's chaotic, while Kurtz is soft-spoken and controlled. The first time we see Kilgore, he's exiting a helicopter. The first time we see Kurtz, he's laying on a bed. I could make another entire video on the musings of Kurtz, but for the sake of time, I'm going to focus solely on how Kurtz believes soldiers should approach warfare. Now, just after Willard leaves Kilgore, he says, "If that's how Kilgore fought the war, I began to wonder what they really had against Kurtz."
They told me that you had gone totally insane. And that your methods were unsound.
Through Kurtz's monologues, we actually discover what these methods are, but it's actually Dennis Hopper's character who introduces them to us. Kurtz is reading a book, muttering some seemingly incoherent things, and the journalist, the character actually doesn't have a name, he asks Willard, "Do you know what this man is saying? It's dialectics. No maybes, no supposes, no fractions. You either love somebody or you hate them." This is a direct rebuke of how Kilgore and his men were fighting the war. It was fractionated, it was diluted, the men were willing to kill their enemies and civilians in the process, but as I mentioned before, they were conducting war in order to escape war. They wanted to capture an outpost so they could surf. They wanted to clear a beach so they could have a cookout. Their mind wasn't committed to waging war, to doing what is necessary to be victorious. The best display of Kurtz's beliefs comes in a story he tells to Willard, and Kurtz prefaces the story by delivering the key aspect of his war philosophy.
Horror has a face, and you must make a friend of horror. Horror and moral terror are your friends. If they are not, then they are enemies to be feared.
Now, the story comes from his days in the Special Forces. Kurtz's squadron inoculates children for polio, and when they come back a few days later, all of the arms were cut off. They were cut off to send a message. If you welcome our enemies and take aid from them, this is what happens. Kurtz is unable to come to grips with how men could do such an act of brutality, but then he comes to the realization that these men were able to make a friend of horror and moral terror. These men were able to kill without feeling, without passion, and without judgment. That is how Kurtz believes soldiers must act in war. Because there's nothing cute about war. The objective is to kill your enemy until they plead for mercy. There is no watering it down to anything but that, no matter how hard officers like Kilgore try to do so through music, surfing, and cookouts. Now, I think we really only see one soldier that could make it into Kurtz's squad in this movie, and that would be the Roach. We meet Roach at the bridge. He's only on screen for like 90 seconds, but it's an incredible 90 seconds. His fellow soldier is trying to kill an enemy by spraying his machine gun into the forest while Jimi Hendrix plays in the background. But when the Roach is pulled out of sleep, what does he do? He turns off the music and then calmly blows up his enemy with his grenade launcher. And he does this without feeling and without passion. There are other Vietnam War movies that have soldiers I think Kurtz would probably take in as well. Think of soldiers like Animal Mother in Full Metal Jacket or Barnes from Platoon. Men without a sense of humor. Men who can remove the chains of morality and are able to do what is ever necessary to defeat the enemy. I think both Kurtz and Kilgore could be summed up by one of their quotes. For Kurtz, it'd have to be, "You must make a friend of horror." For Kilgore, it's "Charlie, don't surf." Those quotes demonstrate their philosophies very, very well. Which philosophy is better? Well, that's up for you to decide. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. I've wanted to analyze Apocalypse Now for quite some time, so rewatching the film and making this video was a lot of fun. If you'd like to watch more videos like this, remember to leave a like and subscribe on your way out. Thanks once again. Have a fantastic rest of your day. I will talk to you soon.